The rhythmic swish of the mop against cold marble was the only sound Nia Reed allowed herself to make. At 3:47 a.m., the penthouse of the Celestine Tower belonged to shadows and silence, and to people like her, the ones paid to exist without being seen. Nia adjusted the collar of her gray uniform for the second time that hour, not out of vanity, but out of habit. A habit born from 29 years of learning that when you're a black woman cleaning the floors of powerful men, the smaller you make yourself, the safer you are. She'd been working for elite facility services for nearly 2 years now, assigned exclusively to the executive floors of buildings where a single dinner bill could cover 3 months of her family's rent. Welcome to the Silk and Steel Diary, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Floor 42 is priority tonight, her supervisor had texted earlier. New client, high profile. Do not engage, do not ask questions. In and out, Nia. Welcome to the Silk and Steel Diary, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. She nodded to herself in the empty hallway, her reflection barely visible in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sleeping city. High profile meant dangerous. It always did. Elite didn't service accountants and dentists. They serviced the kind of men whose names appeared in newspapers with words like alleged and under investigation. The penthouse was cold, sterile, all sharp edges and blacks and whites, like someone had designed it to intimidate rather than comfort. Nia moved through the living room with practiced efficiency, her cartwheels muffled by the plush runner she'd laid down herself. She knew better to leave scuff marks. Table by the window needs polish, she murmured under her breath, her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind. Keep your head down, baby girl. Do your work and go home. That's how we survive. Survival. That's what her life had become. Survival for her mother, whose medical bills kept piling up. Survival for her younger brother, whose college tuition wasn't going to pay itself. Survival for herself, even though some days she wondered what she was surviving for. The sound cut through the silence like broken glass. A child's cry. No, not a cry, a keening, high-pitched, distressed, the kind of sound that bypassed the brain and went straight to the gut. Nia froze, her hands still gripping the mop handle. The sound came again, raw and desperate, from somewhere deeper in the penthouse. Not your business. Keep your head down. But the cry pierced through a den, and this time it was layered with something else, a rhythmic thumping, like small fists against a wall. Nia's chest tightened. She'd heard that sound before. Her cousin Aisha's son, Marcus, used to make sounds like that when the world became too loud, too bright, too much. You're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to see anything. Her feet moved before her mind could stop them. Down the hallway, past the kitchen with its imported Italian marble, past the office with its massive mahogany desk. The sound grew louder, more frantic. Nia's heart hammered against her ribs as she reached a door left slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the darkened corridor. She pushed it open. The nursery was chaos contained in soft blues and whites. A little boy, no more than 5 or 6, sat in the corner, rocking back and forth, his small hands pressed hard against his ears. His eyes were squeezed shut, his mouth open in that terrible, continuous keen. Scattered around him were toys, books, a broken tablet, evidence of a meltdown that had gone too long. Leave, you're not supposed to be here. But Nia Reed had never been good at following rules when a child was hurting. She set down her mop. Slowly, carefully, she sank to the floor about 6 feet away from the boy, far enough not to crowd him, close enough to be present. She didn't speak, didn't reach for him, didn't try to stop the rocking. If you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens next, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us as we continue bringing these stories to life.
Instead, she began to hum. Low at first, barely a whisper, an old melody her grandmother had sung to her on nights when the world felt too big and too cruel. A Korean lullaby from a childhood Nia had spent a lifetime trying to forget. The syllables rose from somewhere deep in her memory, ancient and achingly beautiful. Jajanga, jajanga, uri agi jajanga. The boy's keening faltered. Nia kept singing, her voice soft and steady, weaving the melody around the room like a thread pulling him back from wherever his mind had gone. She watched as his rocking slowed, as his hands loosened against his ears, as his breathing, rapid and shallow, began to even out. O Jungni, Tar Youngni, Uri Agi O Jungni. The boy's eyes opened, dark, wide, focused on her with an intensity that stole her breath. He didn't speak, she sensed he couldn't or wouldn't, but his whole body shifted toward her, drawn to the sound like a drowning man reaching for shore. Nia kept singing, kept her gaze gentle, kept her presence grounded. She didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway, didn't sense the shadow that filled the doorway until it was too late. A voice, low and lethal, cut through the melody like a blade. "Who the hell are you?" Nia's head snapped up, her breath caught in her throat. The man standing in the doorway was tall, impossibly tall, with broad shoulders that filled the frame. His black suit was tailored within an inch of perfection, but his tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. Dark hair fell slightly across his forehead, and his eyes, God, his eyes, were black and cold and utterly unreadable. Tattoos peeked out from his collar, intricate and threatening, the kind earned through violence, not vanity. Ji-hoon Park. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew what he was. She could see it in the way he held himself, in the way his hand instinctively moved toward his jacket, where something heavy and deadly undoubtedly rested. Nia opened her mouth to explain, to apologize, to beg him not to hurt her, but before she could speak, the little boy made a sound, not a cry, not a keen, a soft, contented hum. Ji-hoon Park froze. His gaze snapped from Nia to his son, and for the first time, the cold mask cracked. His eyes widened, his jaw slackened. He looked at his boy, sitting calm and still for the first time in what must have been weeks, maybe months. And then he looked back at Nia. The mop, the uniform, the invisible woman on the floor of his son's nursery, holding his child's piece in the palm of her hand. Ji-hoon Park, one of the most feared men in the city, stood frozen in the doorway, speechless. Ji-hoon Park had killed his first man at 17. By 25, he'd taken over his father's empire. By 32, his name alone was enough to make grown men reconsider their life choices. He'd negotiated with cartels, stared down federal agents, survived 3 assassination attempts, and walked away from a building he'd personally set on fire. Nothing had ever made him feel what he felt in this moment. Helpless. The woman on his floor was small, that was his first coherent thought. Small and dark-skinned, with her hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked painful. Her gray uniform marked her as one of the cleaning staff, the invisible army that moved through his building like ghosts. He should have her removed, questioned, potentially disappeared, depending on what she'd seen, what she'd heard during her time in his home. But she was still singing, and Min-jun, his son who hadn't looked at Ji-hoon Park with anything but fear and confusion for months, was listening.
"I asked you a question." Ji-hoon's voice came out harder than he intended, sharp enough to make most men flinch. The woman's singing faltered, but she didn't stop completely. She held up one hand, slowly, carefully, the way you might approach a wild animal, asking for a moment, asking him to wait. No one asked Ji-hoon Park to wait, but he did. He watched as she finished the verse, her voice dropping to a whisper, then to nothing. Min-jun's eyes remained fixed on her, his small chest rising and falling in steady, peaceful breaths. When the melody finally faded, the boy reached out one tentative hand and placed it on the woman's knee. Ji-hoon's heart cracked clean down the middle. "I'm sorry." The woman's voice was soft, slightly hoarse from singing. She didn't stand, didn't try to run. She stayed exactly where she was, her hand hovering near Min-jun's but not quite touching. "I'm with Elite Facility Services. I'm assigned to this floor. I heard him crying and She swallowed hard. "I couldn't just leave him." "You broke protocol." Ji-hoon stepped into the room and he saw her shoulders tense. "Good, she should be afraid. You entered a restricted area. You touched my son." "I didn't touch him," she said quietly, and there was something in her voice, not defiance but clarity, certainty. "I never touched him. He touched me." Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. He looked at Min-jun, at the way his son's hand rested on this stranger's knee, at the expression of calm that had eluded them for so long. The doctors had tried everything: medications, therapies, specialists flown in from 3 different countries. Nothing worked. Min-jun's episodes had only gotten worse, the meltdowns more frequent, more violent. There were nights Ji-hoon had stood in this very doorway, listening to his son scream, feeling more powerless than he'd ever felt facing down a rival syndicate. And this woman, this cleaner, had walked in and solved it with a song. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. Nia Reed." "The song, where did you learn it?" Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe, or memory. "My grandmother. She was Korean. She used to sing it to me when I was little." Ji-hoon studied her. He was lying, not about the song, but about something else. He could always tell when people were hiding pieces of themselves. It was a survival skill in his world. But right now, the truth didn't matter. Results mattered. Min-jun was calm. "You'll come back tomorrow night," Ji-hoon said. It wasn't a question. Nia's eyes widened. I have other assignments." "You'll come back tomorrow night," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Same time, and you'll sing to him again." "Mr. Park, do you have family, Miss Reed?" The question landed like a blade. Nia Slace went very still, and Ji-hoon saw the answer in her silence. She had people she cared about, people she was working 3 jobs to support, people who made her vulnerable. "Good," Ji-hoon said softly. "Then we understand each other." Nia came back the next night, and the night after that, and the night after that. By the 4th visit, she'd learned the rhythm of the penthouse. The guards changed shifts at 2 a.m., the kitchen staff left at midnight, Ji-hoon's office lights stayed on till dawn most nights, a yellow square of insomnia visible from the nursery window. And Min-jun, sweet, silent Min-jun, waited for her by the door every evening at 3:47 a.m. exactly, his small face pressed against the glass. She should have been terrified, should have quit, disappeared, changed her name and moved to a different city, but every time she considered it, she remembered the way Min-jun's hand felt on her knee, the way his breathing steadied when she sang, the way he'd started humming along, his voice small and uncertain but there. "Miss Reed." Ji-hoon's voice cut through her thoughts on the 7th night. He stood in the doorway of the nursery, his suit jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. Even exhausted, he looked dangerous. "We need to talk." Nia's stomach dropped. She knew this was coming. She'd overstayed her welcome, seen too much, become too familiar with the layout of his home and the vulnerabilities of his son. Men like Ji-hoon Park didn't let loose ends walk free. She stood slowly, careful not to wake Min-jun, who'd finally fallen asleep with his head resting near her leg. "I'll go." "No." Ji-hoon stepped into the room. "You'll stay." Nia blinked. "I don't understand." "You'll quit your job with Elite, effective immediately." He moved to the window, his back to her, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass. "I'm offering you a position here, full-time, live-in. Your sole responsibility will be Min-jun's care." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and terrifying. I have other clients, bills. My mother needs—" "I'll pay you triple what you're making now." Ji-hoon turned to face her, and his expression was unreadable. "Plus housing, medical insurance for your entire family, and a stipend for your brother's education. I've already made inquiries. He's studying engineering at State, correct? I'll cover the full tuition." Nia's blood ran cold. "You investigated me?" "I investigate everyone who enters my home." He said it like it was obvious, like it was reasonable. "You have a mother with stage 3 kidney disease, a younger brother trying to escape the same poverty you grew up in. You work 80 hours a week across 3 jobs and still barely make rent on your studio apartment in Parkside." He paused. "You're drowning, Miss Reed. I'm offering you a life raft." "A cage," Nia whispered. "You're offering me a cage." Something flickered in Ji-hoon's eyes. Not anger, something softer. A gilded one, but yes. Nia looked down at Min-jun, at his peaceful sleeping face. She thought about her mother's medical bills stacked on her kitchen counter, her brother's worried texts about dropping out, the exhaustion that lived in her bones like a permanent resident. "When do I start?" she heard herself say. Ji-hoon's expression didn't change, but she saw his shoulders drop slightly. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. "You already have," he said quietly. "Your things will be moved into the guest suite by morning. Welcome home, Miss Reed." The guest suite was 3 times the size of Nia's apartment, and decorated in shades of cream and gold that made her feel like she was living inside someone else's dream. Her belongings, what few she had, looked ridiculous arranged on the mahogany dresser. A chipped jewelry box, 3 framed photos, a worn copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God that had belonged to her grandmother. Nia sat on the edge of the bed that first morning, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and tried to remember how to breathe. She'd called her mother at dawn, explained the new job, the salary, the insurance that would finally cover the dialysis treatments. Her mother cried. Her brother had whooped so loud she'd had to pull the phone away from her ear. They'd called her a miracle worker, a blessing, their savior. They didn't know she'd sold her freedom for their survival. "Miss Reed," a soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. One of the housekeepers, an older Korean woman named Mrs. Shin, stood in the hallway with fresh towels. "Mr. Park asks that you join him for breakfast. The young master is already awake." Nia followed her down the hallway, past oil paintings that probably cost more than her childhood home, past windows that overlooked a city still rubbing sleep from its eyes. The dining room was all glass and marble, and Min-jun sat at the far end of the table, carefully arranging his breakfast into color-coded sections. Ji-hoon stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and lethal in rapid Korean. When he saw Nia, he ended the call abruptly. "Good, you're here." He gestured to the seat beside Min-jun. "He refuses to eat until you sing." It wasn't a request. It never was. Nia sat down slowly, and Min-jun immediately shifted closer to her, his dark eyes bright with expectation. She began to hum the lullaby, and the boy picked up his fork, eating in time with the melody. "Where did you really learn that song?" Ji-hoon asked, sitting across from them. His gaze was sharp, dissecting. "I told you, my grandmother. Your grandmother who, according to your employment records, was born and raised in Atlanta, who never left the country, who spoke only English and a bit of French she learned in high school." He leaned forward. "So I'll ask again. Where did you learn a lullaby that hasn't been sung outside of a specific region of Gyeonggi province in over 60 years? Nia's hands went cold. She stopped singing. Min-jun made a small sound of protest, but she couldn't continue, couldn't breathe. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Miss Reed." Ji-hoon's voice dropped to something dangerous. "I had the song analyzed. It's not just any lullaby. It's a very specific variant sung by families connected to the Cheongsan region, families connected to—" He paused, watching her face. "You didn't know." "Know what?" Nia whispered. Ji-hoon pulled out his phone, swiped through several screens, then turned it toward her.
The image showed an old photograph, faded and creased, a young Korean woman in traditional hanbok standing beside a black American soldier. Both were smiling, both looked impossibly young. This was taken in 1953, Seoul, after the war. Ji-hoon's voice was quieter now. The woman's name was Park Hae-jin. The soldier was Private James Reed, stationed at Camp Humphreys. Nia's world tilted. That's not... My grandmother's maiden name was Reed, but she never told you, Ji-hoon finished, because women like Park Hae-jin were shamed for falling in love with American soldiers. Many of them left Korea, changed their names, buried their past so deep their own children never knew the truth. He paused. Your grandmother was Korean, Miss Reed. She just spent her entire life pretending she wasn't. Nia stared at the photograph, at the woman whose eyes looked exactly like the eyes she saw in the mirror every morning, at the smile she recognized from old photos tucked in her mother's drawer, the ones labeled Grandma 1960s. She used to hum that song, Nia said softly, the memories surfacing like something drowning finally breaking the surface. Late at night, when she thought no one was listening, she'd sit by the window and hum, and when I asked her what it was, she'd say it was just an old melody, nothing important. Nia's voice cracked. She was homesick. All those years, she was homesick for a place she couldn't admit existed. Min-jun reached out and took Nia's hand. His small fingers squeezed once, twice, a wordless comfort. Ji-hoon watched them both, with his expression unreadable. The song is why he trusts you. You carry the same frequency as his grandmother, my mother. He stood, adjusting his cufflinks. Min-jun is half Korean, half of a world he can't access because his mother is dead, and I don't know how to reach him. He looked at Nia directly. But you do. Whether you knew it or not, you speak his language. Nia looked down at Min-jun, at this small boy who'd somehow recognized something in her that she hadn't even known existed. A heritage, a history, a bloodline singing through her bones. Teach me, Nia whispered. Teach me the rest of the songs. For the first time since she'd met him, Ji-hoon Park smiled. It was small, sad, but real. Every night, he promised, I'll teach you everything. 3 weeks into her new life, Nia learned that luxury was just another word for isolation.
The penthouse was beautiful. The penthouse was suffocating. She had everything she could possibly need and nowhere she was allowed to go. Ji-hoon had assigned her a security detail, a stone-faced man named Chen who followed her at a polite distance whenever she left her suite. For her protection, Ji-hoon had said, but Nia knew surveillance when she saw it. Still, Min-jun was thriving. He'd started making eye contact, started humming more frequently, had even signed more and please after Nia had spent hours teaching him basic signs alongside the Korean songs. Small victories that felt massive in the quiet moments when it was just the two of them. It was during one of these moments, Min-jun building an elaborate tower of blocks while Nia folded his laundry, that she noticed the phone. It sat on the bookshelf, partially hidden behind a stuffed rabbit. Small, black, definitely not a toy, definitely not supposed to be there. Nia's hands stilled on the small shirt she was folding. She glanced toward the door, then back at the phone. Slowly, casually, she walked over and picked it up, tucking it into her pocket as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her heart hammered against her ribs. That evening, while Min-jun napped and Ji-hoon was locked in his office on a conference call that involved a lot of sharp Korean and ominous silences, Nia slipped into the staff bathroom on the lower level, the one place in the penthouse without cameras, she'd learned. Even monsters valued privacy when they showered. She pulled out the phone. The screen was cracked but functional. No password. She scrolled through the messages, her blood growing colder with each line. Episode lasted 34 minutes tonight, mother still unable to calm him. New caretaker arrived, black woman, unknown origin. Park seems attached. Recommend pressure on the weak point. The child is the key. The messages went back weeks, detailed logs of Min-jun's worst moments, notes on Ji-hoon's movements, photographs of the penthouse layout, and at the bottom, a number saved under a single initial. V. Nia's breath came in short, sharp gasps. Someone in this house, someone Min-jun trusted, someone who had access to his most vulnerable moments, was feeding information to Ji-hoon's enemies. The bathroom door opened. Nia shoved the phone into her pocket and spun around. Mrs. Shin stood in the doorway, her kind face creased with concern. "Miss Reed, are you feeling unwell?" "I'm fine." Nia forced a smile, her mind racing. "Just needed a moment." Mrs. Shin stepped in, and Nia saw something flicker across her expression, something that made her seem less like a harmless housekeeper and more like a woman calculating odds. "You look pale," Mrs. Shin said softly, moving closer. "Perhaps you should rest. The young master can be exhausting." "He's not exhausting." Nia's voice came out harder than she intended. "He's wonderful." "Of course." Mrs. Shin's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Still, you work so hard, always watching, always listening." She paused. "Always in the nursery with your hands in your pockets." The air between them crystallized into something dangerous. Nia's hand instinctively moved to her pocket, feeling the outline of the phone through the fabric. Mrs. Shin's gaze followed the movement, and her smile sharpened into something predatory.
"You should be more careful, Miss Reed," the older woman said quietly. "Things go missing in this house all the time, important things, and Mr. Park doesn't like mysteries." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "The question is, what will you do with what you found? Will you run to him like a good little pet, or will you be smart and realize that there are forces in motion far larger than one scared girl trying to save a broken child?" Nia's throat tightened. "Who's V?" Mrs. Shin's expression didn't change, but something cold settled in her eyes. "Someone who understands that empires built on blood don't last forever. Someone who knows that Ji-hoon Park's greatest weakness isn't his business, it's the fact that he loves his son more than he fears death." She tilted her head. "And now, so do you." "I won't let you hurt him." The words came out steadier than Nia felt. "You think you have a choice?" Mrs. Shin laughed softly. "Oh, Miss Reed, you're already part of this whether you like it or not. The moment you sang that lullaby, you became a piece on the board." She moved toward the door, then paused. "When the call comes, and it will come, you'll have to decide which side of history you want to die on. Choose wisely." The door closed behind her with a soft click. Nia stood alone in the bathroom, the phone burning in her pocket, her mind spinning through impossible calculations. She thought about Min-jun sleeping peacefully upstairs, about Ji-hoon in his office, surrounded by enemies he didn't even know lived under his own roof, about her mother, her brother, the life she'd built on the foundation of other people's secrets. Mrs. Shin was right about one thing. Nia was already part of this, and she'd be damned if she let them use Min-jun as a weapon. She pulled out the phone, memorized every message, every timestamp, every detail. Then she walked upstairs, past Chen, who nodded at her with his usual stone face, past the sitting room where two other housekeepers chatted in low voices, straight to Ji-hoon's office door. She knocked once, twice. "Come in." Nia pushed open the door. Ji-hoon looked up from his desk, annoyance flickering across his face until he saw her expression. "We need to talk," Nia said quietly, pulling the phone from her pocket. "And you're not going to like what I have to say." The meeting room on the 41st floor was supposed to be empty. Nia had checked the schedule twice. Ji-hoon's security briefings were always held in his private office, never in the sterile conference space with its floor-to-ceiling windows and glass table that looked like it belonged in a museum.
But Mrs. Shin had specifically asked her to polish the floors tonight, insisting that important guests would be arriving in the morning. Mrs. Shin, who Ji-hoon had removed from the penthouse 3 days ago after Nia had shown him the phone. Mrs. Shin, who'd been escorted out with Chen with a blank expression and a promise that her service was no longer required. Mrs. Shin, who apparently still had access to the staff scheduling system. Nia should have known better, should have questioned why she was being sent to clean a room that Ji-hoon never used at 11 p.m. when most of the building's occupants were long gone. But Min-jun had finally fallen asleep after a difficult evening, and Ji-hoon had left for a meeting across town, and Nia had needed to feel useful in some way beyond singing lullabies and watching her back. So she'd gone. The meeting room was dark except for the ambient glow of the city below. Nia flipped on the lights, wheeled in her cart, and had just started running the polisher across the marble when she heard voices in the hallway. Men's voices. Low, speaking Korean.
Nia's blood went cold. She killed the polisher and looked around frantically. The room was too open, too exposed. No closets, no alcoves, just glass and chrome and nowhere to hide except... She ducked under the conference table, pulling her cart with her, praying the tablecloth hung low enough to conceal her presence. Her heart slammed against her ribs as the door opened and lights flooded the space. Confirmed the route? One voice was saying, smooth, cultured, speaking Korean with an accent Nia couldn't place. He'll take the private elevator from the parking garage, alone. The cameras. Another voice, rougher. Familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. Disabled at 12:47. The window is 8 minutes, more than enough. Footsteps circled the table. Nia pressed herself against the table's central support, barely breathing. Through the gap in the tablecloth, she could see expensive shoes, 3 sets, all pointed toward the windows overlooking the street below. And the child? The third voice was cold, clinical. The target's son? Collateral damage, the smooth voice replied. V wants the entire bloodline erased. The Park Empire dies tonight. Nia's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. She knew that phrase, V, the same initial from the phone, the same person Mrs. Shin had mentioned with something approaching reverence. The cleaner, the rough voice said, and Nia's entire body went rigid. The black woman. She's been asking questions, getting too close to the boy. Mrs. Shin handled it, sent her down here to keep her occupied while we finish preparations. A pause. If she becomes a problem after tonight, we'll handle her too. The shoes turned away from the windows, and for one terrible moment, Nia thought they were heading toward the table, but they moved toward the door instead. 47 minutes, the smooth voice said. Park's meeting ends at 12:30. He'll be back by 12:45. Everything needs to be in position. The door opened, closed. Silence. Nia stayed under the table for another full minute, her mind racing through the impossible math. It was 11:14 now. Ji-hoon would be back in an hour and a half, walking straight into an ambush. Min-jun was upstairs, alone except for the guards who might already be compromised. And she was trapped 41 floors down with no phone, no backup, and no way to warn anyone without revealing that she'd overheard everything. She crawled out from under the table on shaking legs. Her reflection stared back at her in the dark windows, a small woman in a gray uniform who was suddenly responsible for preventing a massacre. Think. She couldn't call Ji-hoon directly. His phone would be monitored. She couldn't go to the guards. She didn't know which ones were loyal and which ones had already been bought. She couldn't evacuate Min-jun without triggering alarms that would alert the conspirators. But she could move through this building like a ghost, like someone who'd spent years learning the secret pathways that the powerful never saw. The service corridors, the maintenance shafts, the delivery tunnels that connected the parking garage to the service elevators. She knew them all, had mapped them during her first weeks as a cleaner, memorizing escape routes out of habit and survival instinct. Nia grabbed a cleaning rag from her cart, wiped down the polisher to remove any evidence she'd been here, and moved to the door. She cracked it open, peering into the hallway. Empty, but voices drifted from somewhere nearby, the men still coordinating. She slipped out and ran. Not toward the main elevators, not toward the penthouse, toward the staff stairwell at the far end of the corridor, the one that connected to the maintenance levels below. Her feet barely made a sound on the carpet. Her breathing came in controlled, measured gasps. She had 45 minutes to save the only family she had left. 45 minutes to prove that invisibility could be a weapon just as deadly as any gun.
Nia hit the stairwell door and plunged into the darkness below, her grandmother's lullaby humming in her mind like a prayer. Jajanga, jajanga, uriagi jajanga. Hold on, Min-jun, I'm coming. Nia burst through the nursery door at 11:47 p.m., her uniform soaked with sweat, her lungs burning from climbing 41 flights of stairs through the maintenance shaft. Min-jun sat up in his bed, eyes wide, sensing the panic radiating from her like heat. "We have to go," she whispered, pulling him into her arms. He was heavier than she expected, his small body rigid with confusion. "I need you to be brave, okay? Like in the stories. Remember the story about the tiger and the little boy?" Min-jun nodded against her shoulder. He didn't speak, but his arms wrapped around her neck, trusting her completely. The trust almost broke her. Nia grabbed his noise-canceling headphones from the nightstand and slipped them over his ears. If things went wrong, when things went wrong, she didn't want him to hear it. She wrapped him in his favorite blanket, the soft blue one with stars that Ji-hoon had imported from Korea, and moved toward the door. The hallway was too quiet. Chen she had been stationed outside the nursery, always, but his post was empty, his radio lying discarded on the floor, its screen cracked. Nia's stomach dropped. Either he was compromised, or he was already dead. A sound echoed from the main living area, glass breaking, a muffled shout cut short. They were already inside. Nia spun away from the main corridor and ran toward the kitchen, Min-jun bouncing against her hip. The service elevator, the one the staff used to transport laundry and supplies, was hidden behind the pantry. Most people didn't even know it existed. Ji-hoon's security had mapped every entrance to the penthouse, except the ones designed for invisible people. She slammed through the pantry door and hit the elevator button. Once, twice, 3 times. Come on, come on, come on! Footsteps behind her, heavy, running. The elevator dinged. Nia threw herself inside just as a figure rounded the corner. One of the guards, his face obscured by a black mask, his gun already raised. She punched the button for the sub-basement as the doors began to close. The guard lunged forward, his hand reaching through the gap. The doors slammed shut on his wrist. He screamed. The gun clattered to the floor inside the elevator. Nia kicked it into the corner and held Min-jun tighter as the elevator lurched downward. The boy was shaking, his small hands fisted in her uniform, his face buried against her neck. She started humming, soft, steady, the only comfort she could offer. The elevator stopped at the 40th floor. Nia's breath caught. The doors opened. 3 men stood in the service corridor, their expressions shifting from surprise to recognition to lethal intent in the span of a heartbeat. The one in front reached for his weapon. Nia grabbed the discarded gun from the corner and fired. She'd never held a gun before, didn't know if the safety was on or off, didn't know how to aim, didn't know anything except that Min-jun was in her arms and these men wanted him dead. The recoil nearly knocked her backward. The shot went wide, embedding in the wall beside the men's heads. But it was enough. They dove for cover, and Nia slammed her hand on the closed door button, hitting the sub-basement again, then the emergency stop override that would prevent anyone from calling the elevator until it reached its destination. The elevator plummeted. Min-jun whimpered softly. Nia dropped the gun and wrapped both arms around him, still humming through her terror. 이요정니 타령니 우리 아기 이요정니.
The sub-basement was a maze of storage rooms and mechanical equipment, lit by flickering fluorescent lights that hummed like insects. Nia had been down here exactly once 3 weeks ago, when she'd needed to retrieve extra linens. She remembered the layout in fragments: the boiler room to the left, the laundry facility straight ahead, and beyond that, the industrial chutes that sent soiled linens down from every floor. The chutes that were wide enough for a child.
She ran through the concrete corridors, Min-jun bouncing against her hip, her mind calculating impossible angles. The laundry chutes fed into collection bins on the ground level, the actual ground level, not the lobby, but the service entrance where delivery trucks unloaded supplies at dawn. If she could get Min-jun down there, into the bins, cover him with enough fabric to hide him. Gunshots echoed from somewhere above, shouting, the distinctive sound of doors being kicked open. They were searching floor by floor. Nia reached the laundry facility and found the access panel for the chute system. Her hands shook as she pried it open, revealing a dark shaft that smelled like detergent and metal. The opening was small, barely large enough, but it would have to work. Min-jun, she pulled back so she could see his face, so he could read her lips. I need you to slide down, like at the playground. Remember the big slide? He shook his head frantically. No, his eyes were wide with fear. I know it's scary, Nia's voice cracked, but I'll be right behind you, I promise. And at the bottom, there are soft blankets, so many soft blankets. You'll land like a superhero. She was lying. She had no idea what he'd land on, but she was out of options and out of time. Min-jun looked at her for a long moment, then, slowly, he nodded. Nia lifted him to the opening, her arms shaking. Cover your head, tuck your chin. Don't try to stop yourself, just let go. She released him. For one terrible second she heard nothing, then a soft thump from far below, a pause, and then a small, shaky hum, the melody of the lullaby, sung back to her through the darkness. He was alive. Nia grabbed every sheet and towel she could reach and shoved them down the chute, praying they'd land on top of him, create enough cover to hide him from anyone searching the ground level. Then she climbed into the chute herself, her body barely fitting, and let gravity pull her into the unknown. She fell through darkness, her shoulders scraping against metal, her mind silent except for one thought. Please, please let him be safe. Nia landed hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. She lay gasping in a pile of soiled linens, her body screaming in protest, her vision blurred with pain. Above her, the chute opening was a distant square of dim light. Below her, somewhere in the mound of fabric. Min-jun, she wheezed, clawing through sheets and towels. Min-jun, baby, where are you? A small hand emerged from the pile, reaching for her. Nia sobbed with relief and pulled him free, checking him frantically for injuries. Bruised, terrified, but whole. His headphones had fallen off during the descent, and tears streaked his face, but he was alive. We have to move, she whispered, helping him stand. The ground-level service area was a concrete cavern of loading docks and industrial equipment. Emergency exit signs glowed red in the darkness. 50 feet, just 50 feet to the door that led to the street, to freedom, to... You really should have stayed in the nursery. The voice came from the shadows near the loading dock. Nia spun, pulling Min-jun behind her, placing her body between him and the figure that emerged into the dim light. Mrs. Shin looked different without her kind smile, older, harder. A gun hung loosely in her right hand, pointed at the ground but ready. Behind her, 2 men flanked the exit, the same men from the meeting room, the ones who'd spoken about erasing bloodlines. You actually liked you, Mrs. Shin continued, stepping closer. Reminded me of myself 40 years ago, poor, desperate, willing to do anything for the people you loved. She tilted her head. That's why this is unfortunate. You don't have to do this. Nia's voice was steady despite the terror coursing through her. Whatever they're paying you.
This isn't about money. Mrs. Shin's expression hardened. This is about justice. Ji-hoon Park's father destroyed my family, took everything. My husband, my sons, my livelihood. He built his empire on the bones of people like us, and his son inherited that blood debt. She raised the gun slightly. Tonight, that debt gets paid. By killing a child? Nia's voice rose, sharp with disbelief. By murdering a 6-year-old boy who's never hurt anyone, who can't even speak to defend himself. Collateral damage, Mrs. Shin said, echoing the words from the meeting room. The sins of the father are not the sins of the son. Nia took a step forward, her hands raised, her body still shielding Min-jun. You think I don't understand what it's like to be powerless? To watch the people you love suffer while the powerful take and take and take? Her voice cracked. My mother is dying because she couldn't afford the insurance that men like Ji-hoon's father lobbied to keep expensive. My brother almost dropped out of school because the system is designed to keep people like us poor. I know what you've lost. Mrs. Shin's gun hand wavered slightly. But Min-jun didn't take anything from you. He's just a little boy who's scared of loud noises and loves soft blankets and hums when he's happy. He's not his father, he's not his grandfather, he's just a child who deserves a chance to be better than the people who came before him. You're naive, Mrs. Shin whispered, but her conviction was cracking. Maybe, Nia took another step forward, or maybe I'm the only person in this building who sees him as human instead of a chess piece. She paused. You said you reminded me of yourself, so let me ask you something. 40 years ago, when you were young and desperate and angry, if someone had offered you a choice between revenge and mercy, which would the woman you wanted to be have chosen? Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Behind Mrs. Shin, one of the men shifted impatiently. We don't have time for this. Take the shot. But Mrs. Shin didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on Nia, on the small woman in a stained uniform standing between a gun and a child, armed with nothing but her conviction. My husband, Mrs. Shin said quietly, used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when they're powerful, it's what they do when they have nothing left to lose. Her hand trembled. You have nothing, no weapon, no backup, no way out, and you're still standing there. Because he's worth it, Nia said simply. Every child is worth it. Mrs. Shin's gun lowered an inch, then another. Boss, what are you— One of the men started forward. The ground-level door exploded inward. Ji-hoon Park entered like a storm, flanked by 6 armed men in tactical gear. His suit was torn, blood splattered across his white shirt. Not his blood, Nia realized distantly, and his eyes were wild with something that looked almost like fear. Those eyes found Min-jun first, then Nia, then Mrs. Shin with her wavering gun. Step away from them. Ji-hoon's voice was barely human. Now. But Mrs. Shin's already lowering her weapon, her face crumpling with something that looked like relief, like she'd been waiting for someone to give her permission to stop, to choose mercy over the rage that had defined her for 40 years. My husband, she said softly, her gun clattering to the concrete. My husband, he would have hated what I became. The 2 men behind her reached for their weapons. Ji-hoon's team moved faster. Gunshots rang out in the enclosed space. Brief, precise, final. The men fell. Mrs. Shin stood alone, empty-handed, as Ji-hoon's guards surrounded her. But Nia wasn't watching them. She'd already turned back to Min-jun, pulling him into her arms, covering his ears even though the silence had already fallen. She hummed the lullaby through her tears, feeling his small body shake against hers. Jajanga, udi agi jajanga. Ji-hoon crossed the space in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside them, his hands hovering over his son, afraid to touch him, afraid he might shatter. "He's okay," Nia whispered. "We're okay." And for the first time since she'd met him, Ji-hoon Park, the man who'd killed his first victim at 17, who'd built an empire on violence, wept. 3 months later, Nia stood in the nursery doorway and watched Min-jun paint. Not with brushes, he hated the texture, but with his fingers, creating swirling patterns of blue and gold across the oversized canvas Ji-hoon had mounted to the wall. The boy hummed while he worked, a melody Nia had taught him last week, something her grandmother had sung about spring flowers and new beginnings. He was humming, creating, thriving. "He's getting better at staying inside the lines," Ji-hoon said, quietly, appearing beside her. He no longer wore suits every day. Today it was dark jeans and a simple black shirt, his hair slightly disheveled from the morning he'd spent teaching Min-jun how to make pancakes. Or maybe he's realized the lines don't matter. Nia smiled. The lines definitely don't matter. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Min-jun work. The penthouse had changed in the months since that terrible night. The sterile whites and blacks had been softened with color, warm creams and gentle blues, textures that Min-jun could touch without discomfort, spaces designed for living rather than intimidating. The fortress had become a home. Ji-hoon had changed too. The threat from V's organization had been neutralized, swiftly, brutally, in ways Nia had chosen not to ask about. But the aftermath had forced him to look at his empire with new eyes, to recognize that the violence that had built his power was the same violence that had nearly destroyed his son. He'd started divesting from the illegal operations, redirecting resources toward legitimate businesses. It would take years to fully extract himself from the underworld, but he was trying. For Min-jun, for the future he wanted his son to inherit. "Your mother called this morning," Ji-hoon said, glancing at Nia. "The kidney transplant is scheduled for next month. She wanted you to know she's feeling optimistic." Nia's throat tightened. The transplant, the miracle she'd stopped believing in. Ji-hoon had paid for it without being asked, had arranged for the best doctors, the best facility, the best possible care. "You didn't have to." "I did." His voice was firm. "You saved my son's life. You saved mine." He paused. "Besides, I've spent years taking from families like yours. It's time I gave something back." Min-jun abandoned his painting and walked over to them, tugging on Nia's sleeve. He pointed to the piano in the corner, the one Ji-hoon had bought last month when he discovered Min-jun's fascination with musical sounds. "You want to play?" Nia asked as she spoke. Min-jun nodded eagerly and pulled her toward the instrument. She sat on the bench and Min-jun climbed into her lap, his small hands hovering over the keys. She guided his fingers to middle C, showing him how to press gently, how to let the sound bloom and fade. He pressed the key, once, twice, then began to pick out a melody, halting, uncertain, but unmistakably the lullaby she'd sung that first night. "Jajanga, jajanga, uri agi jajanga." Nia's vision blurred with tears. She looked up and found Ji-hoon standing by the window, his expression open and soft, in a way that would have been unthinkable 4 months ago. "He's trying to play it for you," Ji-hoon said quietly. "He practices every day when you're with your mother. He wants to surprise you." "He already has," Nia whispered. Min-jun played through the melody, missing notes and repeating phrases, but pouring his whole heart into the effort. When he finished, he turned in Nia's lap and signed a phrase she'd taught him weeks ago, but hadn't been sure he'd understood. "I love you."
Nia pulled him close, her tears falling freely now. "I love you too, sweetheart, so much." Ji-hoon crossed the room and knelt beside the piano bench, completing the circle. His hand rested on Min-jun's back, gentle and sure. "We were thinking," he said, his eyes meeting Nia's, "that Min-jun needs consistency, permanence. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We'd like you to stay, not as an employee, as family." Nia's breath caught. "Ji-hoon? I know it's complicated. I know I can't erase who I am or what I've done. I know I'm still connected to a world that almost destroyed all of us." His voice was raw, honest. "But I'm trying to be better, for him, and I can't do that without you." Min-jun looked between them, his dark eyes wide and hopeful. Nia thought about the woman she'd been 4 months ago, the invisible cleaner who'd moved through other people's lives like a ghost, too afraid to be seen, too tired to hope for anything beyond survival. She thought about her grandmother, who'd buried her heritage so deep she'd almost forgotten how to sing. She thought about all the people who'd told her to keep her head down, to stay small, to accept that some lives mattered more than others. And then she looked at Min-jun, this beautiful, complicated, extraordinary child who'd taught her that the smallest voice could change everything. "Yes," she said simply, "I'll stay." Ji-hoon's shoulders dropped with relief. He reached out, hesitated, then took her free hand in his. The gesture was tentative, uncertain, but real. "Thank you." Min-jun signed something else, his small hands moving excitedly. "Sing, together." So they did. All 3 of them clustered around the piano in the soft morning light, singing the ancient lullaby that had somehow bridged impossible distances. Ji-hoon's voice was rough and unpracticed, stumbling over the Korean syllables he'd spoken as a child, but forgotten how to feel. Nia's voice was clear and steady, carrying the melody her grandmother had passed down through generations, and Min-jun hummed along, adding his own small music to theirs. "Jajanga, jajanga, uri agi jajanga." Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, brutal and beautiful, full of people seeking power and people seeking survival. But inside the penthouse that once was a fortress and now a home, 3 people who'd found each other in the darkness sang about peace. And for the first time in longer than any of them could remember, the future felt like something worth singing about. Nia was no longer invisible. She was the heart of everything, and she would never be small again.